We will swiftly continue with Ms. Danielle DePaulis. She's a research analyst at EFSAS. She holds a master's degree in public policy and governance at the University of Amsterdam, as well as a degree in credit public policy and analysis at the American University. And Ms. DePaulis will, as I said before, talk about Islamic State in Afghanistan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, great. Thank you to the organizers for letting me speak today on this panel. I will be presenting today on the topic of Afghanistan, as recently peace talks with the Taliban have been featured in the news quite heavily. I'll start with some background and history for those who may not know, and then divulge into the current status of the country and possible outcomes for the future. So, okay. Afghanistan and its people have been victims of conflicts for decades. Foreign influence in Afghanistan dates back as far as the 19th century with the British invasion of 1832. Then, in the latter half of the same century, Britain managed to establish control over Afghan foreign affairs, which continued until into the 20th century. Although there was a short-lived period of independence post-British invasion, with General Mohammed Daoud's decision to turn towards the Soviet Union for economic and military assistance in 1953, independence once again became a myth. Under his tumultuous reign, which is prominent with his attempts to play off the USSR against Western powers, Afghanistan fell under the heavy control and influence of the USSR. And its history recounts, any struggle to thwart Soviet presence inevitably involves the United States. In 1979, the Soviet Army invaded Afghanistan and propped up a communist government. The series of events that ensued from the 1970s in Afghanistan ultimately led to the development of a force that has become uncontrollable. The last 40 years of conflicts in South Asia has triggered a large majority of Western countries to reshape their foreign policies and spending towards the region. Yet, the Afghan problem, as it has been coined, continues to rage on. We are all most likely quite familiar with the subsequent events that have taken place in Afghanistan and the region since the 1970s. Specifically post-September 11, 2001, with the invasion of U.S. troops in the region. The main purpose of the invasion was to fight the so-called war on terror, dismantle al-Qaeda and then the Taliban, find Osama bin Laden, and establish peace and stability in the country. Originally, the Taliban and al-Qaeda were ostensibly defeated very quickly after the invasion. Time was spent establishing a U.S.-backed Afghan government and training Afghan military security, which as a result led to the expansion of territory under the control of the U.S. American troops, alongside their NATO allies, have remained in Afghanistan since 2001, preserving the control of territory and attempting to squash any resurgence from armed radical groups. However, now 17 years after the original overthrow of the terrorist outfits, the Taliban controls about 55% of Afghanistan. That's more territory than at any point since the US-led invasion in 2001, and they remain the most powerful insurgent group in Afghanistan. In addition, its membership is mainly Afghan, in comparison to a group like the Islamic State, which is comprised of a large number of foreign fighters from abroad. After the exhaustive amount of resources and time spent on assuring that the terrorist group would remain a non-existent threat, and over a decade attempt that has inevitably proved futile, many are now questioning what the other options are possibly left for the future of Afghanistan. In the past several months, the conversation about peace talks with the Taliban has gained momentum. And indeed, within the last month, talk has turned into action with President Ghani forming a team of 12 members in order to negotiate any positive solution. Ghani's offer would allow members of the terrorist outfit to run for government, release known fighters from jail, and require foreign fighters to leave the country. Some are hesitant of this plan due to beliefs that this may condone and mainstream the violence that has occurred over the last 2 decades, and therefore neither provide a room for reconciliation nor let Taliban members face repercussions for their actions. Yet, peace processes are often delicate balances of those conflicting factors. Thus, it is essential that peace and conflict specialists are referred to and consulted to the utmost extent. While this endeavor, as also other attempts to sit across with the table from the Taliban in search of long elusive peace in Afghanistan, are welcome developments, The absence of insistence that the terrorist outfit denounce violence prior to ushering it onto the table does raise serious concerns. The latest push for talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and in actuality the United States, stems from the reality on the ground. The reality is that the Taliban is now in control and influence over a big part of the Afghan soil. Many experts argue that an end to the ongoing and drawn-out conflict will only come to fruition with talks between the Taliban and the United States. It is not the Afghan government that has overthrown the Taliban in the past, but the US government, and that is the main concern when negotiating. Russia held the Moscow format this past November, where among the participating parties there were members of the Taliban, 4 members of Afghanistan's highest peace council, and the representatives of the United States government acting as observers. Although no final agreements were made, it was certainly a step towards a new policy plan, which is inclusive of the Taliban and the future of Afghanistan. Although the US has purposely never agreed to hold talks with the terrorist group, the American government now seems to find itself out of options with less hope and strength. Some experts reckon that negotiations may be worth the effort, since it is what the extremist group has demanded from the beginning, and therefore it could diminish the levels of violence in the region. The terrorist group's claims and President Ghani's offers are in that sense quite overlapping, namely to provide the Taliban with a place within the Afghan government and cast away the occupation of all foreign fighters in the region. Another possible reason why the Taliban might be interested in peace talks is that it might further strengthen their stature within the country, giving them more leverage to fight its battle for dominion against a fraction of the Islamic State in Afghanistan, namely the Islamic State of the Khorasan province, or otherwise known as ISKP. In the last 2 to 3 years, the Taliban and ISKP have been battling for territory throughout Afghanistan, wreaking havoc amongst the civilian population. The ISKP in Afghanistan has been at the forefront of some of the deadliest attacks in the country in recent time. The Islamic State in Afghanistan first emerged in 2014, just as the native combat troops were pulling out and withdrawing from the country, and handing over the responsibility to the Afghan security forces. The armed group swelled in Afghanistan thereafter, with its climax being in this past 2017. As the IS was largely defeated in Iraq and Syria and lost much of its territory, fighters fled to Afghanistan and throughout the rest of the South Asian region looking for a new battleground and resurgence. Although the group in Afghanistan has sworn allegiance to the previous caliphate in Raqqa, the group in Afghanistan is mainly disjointed from the caliphate and does not receive many resources or have much communication with that network. The group mainly operates on its own and funds itself. The IS militants initially overran large parts of the eastern Nangarhar and Kunar provinces, which are near the Pakistan border. This is where they began their engagement in a turf war with the Taliban. The Taliban, the Haqqani network, and other terrorist organizations present in Afghanistan have been alleged to be supported by Pakistan's military establishment and acting in accordance with the country's external strategic objectives. In addition, it has been argued that the aforementioned terrorist groups have been using the territory of Pakistan as a safe haven to plan and carry out attacks in order to destabilize the government in Kabul. The threat of the IS in the country was initially played down, as it thought that the Taliban was just rebranding. Yet, the threat was much larger and more eminent than the US and other NATO forces wanted to believe. It is believed that around 3,000 to 5,000 IS fighters potentially still remain in Afghanistan. ISKP is very much an international entity and comprised of members from different Pashtun-dominated groups like the Tehreek-i-Taliban Pakistan, or the TTP, Lashkar-e-Taiba, in addition to Kashmiri and Baloch militants and Uyghur fighters from China's Xinjiang province. Having such a great diversity amongst its membership, the ISKP faces a risk of internal collisions, which could further escalate and create conflicts among its members, leading to the destabilization of the group and the region. And indeed, as it stands now in the latter part of 2018, IS is simply a shadow of its former self, with many of its fighters and resources now lost. A major leader of the ISKP was killed this past August, and the group has begun to fray, losing whatever stronghold it did have. The power of the Taliban has proved very strong in the battle over the ISKP, and some members of the ISKP have surrendered to the Taliban or have been taken hostage. The Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, and now in Afghanistan, have been mainly pushed underground. Major powers in the region are in disagreement about what the real threat in Afghanistan is and what will remain to be, which makes it difficult to coordinate an appropriate response to the dual challenge that is presented now by both the Taliban and the Islamic State. A large part of the discussion in regards to terrorism now is if the Islamic State will resurge and where and what exactly is the next terrorist threat. Many analysts are focused on how to predict the next move of the IS or if there will be a new group formed. To answer these questions, it is important to analyze what the desires of the group are and the realities which face the group's cadre and leadership. One of the possibilities may be a readjustment and reestablishment of dominion in one of the IS pledged provinces. Hence, close watch should be kept on the Northwest African region. As many fighters flee from the Middle East and South Asia, the unrest in Africa has been a reason for a resurgence and fighters have found refuge there. Libya, within the last year, has been one of the most active IS provinces and seems to be creating a true mini-state. Although the insurgency there has been somewhat lessened, thousands of fighters have flocked to Libya and the US of a threat of instability. Sinai and Nigeria also suffer from the presence of IS fighters, with Boko Haram as the main terrorist group in the region, whose members have broken off to also join IS. It is important for us to note that just because the war on the Islamic State has thought to be won for now, this is really only in terms of loss of territory. The fact that the group has gone underground may not mean much as the ideology and motivations remain strong, and the state still has thousands of members in the region of origin and supporters throughout the world. To focus too strongly on this battle against terrorism and traditional war narratives can come back to hurt the global community in the long run. Since social media has played a huge role in the incentive and impetus of foreign fighters around the world, the fight against terrorism should be perceived through this new uncharted front created by this medium. Now that the IS is weaker, local and regional fractions in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan may use this group as a short-term ally, and in turn the IS may also exploit them in order to regain power and influence. As the peace talks possibly loom ahead, and the Taliban potentially reach closer to becoming a legitimized entity of the Afghan state, the Islamic State might see this as potential to also be recognized and gain momentum once again. It is critical that when navigating the path ahead, the West and other dominant global powers learn from past mistakes that have triggered the emergence and the development of terrorist outfits. The Trump administration has increasingly talked of pulling troops out of Africa and other areas where terrorist outfits remain at large in line with its isolationist policy. But however, analysts warn this will lead to similar vacuums that caused the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban to rise to power in the first place. What the regions of Iraq, Syria, South Asia, and parts of Africa need are solutions backed by the heavy support of the government, which aim at targeting the root of the problems, making people of these regions feel like they are represented with a voice.